Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. It is what they call Super Wild Card Weekend right now in the NFL. Playoffs are officially upon us. Greg, I'm excited to watch them, even though I'll be doing it from my couch this year.
Well, who would have thunk a number of weeks ago that the Tennessee Titans would not be playing on Super Wild Card Weekend, Buck?
Well, I think, depending at some point in the last 7 weeks, that thought had probably occurred to me. But yeah, a tough ending for them in Jacksonville, and a game that honestly, Greg, they felt very much in control of. They had some opportunities. Trevor Lawrence was making some misses that we haven't really seen him make in the last couple of weeks, and just a disaster play at the end of that game that gave Jacksonville their first lead and really, sealed it for them.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that play, but when I watched that tape, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, and I kept seeing the score because when I watch tape before each play, the scoreboard comes up.
Mm-hmm.
I started to have almost similar thoughts, believe it or not, even though they could not run the ball, and we can address that as well. I started almost to have similar thoughts to when they lost to Cincinnati a year ago, that one could argue that, hey, they played Titans football and they were winning with what, 3 minutes remaining is when that fumble recovery TD occurred.
251.
Yeah. So, again, it comes back to that same point is they'll have to do, I guess, in the building, they'll have to hire a GM. Mike Vrabel, you and I both know, is a pretty smart guy. I don't think he has tunnel vision. I don't think he has a condensed view of the world. But they have to decide ultimately what they want to be and need to be to compete in a conference that has Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. What's the best way to compete and win in a conference that has those quarterbacks and those teams?
Which is the same question, Greg, that they've had kind of in front of them for, at least I'd say
A couple of years.
at least a couple of years at this point, right? We've had a version of this discussion. Now they've obviously had a change with some of their staff, including the offensive coordinator, and what that necessarily brings about, we don't know until they decide on probably first a general manager and then an OC after that. But it does feel like, they've been trying to ride this thing out as best as they felt they could. But it's difficult to argue that you couldn't kind of see this coming for them in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and then to play devil's advocate, if you're in their building and you feel like, hey, we're not really that bad. And again, I don't know how anybody thinks, but it wasn't that long ago with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback that they got to an AFC championship game, that they averaged 30 points a game, which everybody would take any time, any year. So what has happened that has changed that? Do they view it as, hey, we simply don't have the necessary personnel to do that, and we don't need to change our philosophy or our approach, we just need to get better personnel? Or is Mike and others saying, hey, the philosophy is not quite working the way we hope it would, and we need to make some kind of meaningful philosophical and conceptual change in how we go about producing our offense? We don't know the answer to that question because, like I said, a few years back, they did average 30 points a game, and they looked like a pretty explosive offense at times. So is it a function of philosophy? Is it a function of personnel? It's kind of a mix of both? These are not easy questions to answer. I know very often fans think they're simple questions, but they're really not.
No, and I think it's a fascinating, like, kind of, the process of putting together a team
Correct.
is interesting to fans. I think is obviously the games are the reason that we're all attracted to football, but just the way that the process goes about is always such a fascination to me, and helps me certainly pass the time during the off season. But for them, Greg, certainly there's got to be somewhere in between, right? We know what their personnel deficiencies were. We know.
Yeah, and that's the issue. So do they look at this and say, hey, our offensive line's not very good? And by the way, that really showed up in this game against the Jaguars. They could not run block at all. They couldn't move anybody at the first level. It prevented O-linemen from climbing effectively to the second level. They have obviously huge problems in one-on-one pass protection. So we can say personnel. We can look at the O-line and say, what if they had 3 or 4 really good O-linemen? They don't have to be all pros and Hall of Famers, but what if they had 3 or 4 good O-linemen? Would playing the style in which they play, would they be able to function? What happens if Treylon Burks, after another offseason, really becomes I don't want to say a big time wideout, that might be a little much, but becomes a really good player? You know, uh, again, is it all personnel based where they just need better people, or do they truly need to change the way in which they play? You know, and I know this might seem blasphemous to many, and he's obviously been a great player, but when all's said and done, does Derrick Henry in some way put a little bit of a ball and chain around moving forward? Because as long as Derrick Henry is your feature back, is the idea that you have to give him 330, 350 carries a year. Do you have to do that?
And certainly, I mean that.
I don't, by the way, I don't know the answer to these questions.
No, but
You
these
know,
are
I
the
think
questions that everybody needs to be asking heading
and
into the
they
next
need to
season.
figure it out. You know, you and
Right.
we're just a bunch of guys sitting around talking like we know what we're talking about. But, you know, they need to figure that out. And these are questions that need to be asked and answered.
The difference is one of us actually knows what they're talking about, and the other one's
Well,
just sitting over here asking the question.
but you know what I'm saying. I mean,
Sure,
you
absolutely.
know, is in a league in which I think there's 2 parts to this. Many would say, smart people would say there's many different ways to win, which there are. Okay. But then smart people would also say it is a league where your passing game needs to be at whether it's the foundation or whether it's the driving force in games, needs to be a big factor.
Yeah.
And that if you can't throw the ball proactively and even reactively, because you know what everybody says, third down, the money down is the quarterback's down. You got to be able to throw the ball on third down. You know, if you can't do that with any kind of consistency, no matter how good your back is, are you going at some point to stop offensively? Is your offense going to, you know, run up against a brick wall?
Well, I mean, in the case of them, they led the league in 3 and outs, so I think the answer is right there in front of them. I mean, they throw away a lot of first downs with these Derrick Henry negative plays, and then they end up in third and long situations for their passing game
I
far too
mean,
often at this point.
keep one thing in mind, and maybe this playoff game, and again, they played with Josh Dobbs, who, by the way, I thought acquitted himself extremely well in his 2 starts.
Agreed.
He's a whole different conversation, but they had 28 first down plays versus the Jaguars. Henry carried the ball on 21 of them, Buck, and he gained 59 yards with a long run of 9 yards, which came in the fourth quarter. And 14 of those 21 first down runs came out of 12 or 13 personnel, meaning 2 tight ends or 3 tight ends. And on those 14 runs out of multiple tight end personnel, he only gains 37 yards.
Titans football till the end. That's
No, I mean, but I mean, you know, it relates to what we're talking about is,
absolutely.
you know, is that your approach? Are you saying we just have to execute better with better people, or are we saying that we need to kind of change our approach a little bit philosophically, because that's not really the way to produce points in this league right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've known their answer to that question for the past couple of years. Now they're in a little bit of a different space, so there'll be a
Right.
lot of time to discuss those things moving forward. For Greg, though, for the Jaguars, I mean, Trevor Lawrence obviously he was an active participant, and they were having a lot of success throwing the ball early. The Titans defense was not pressuring him very well in the first half of that game.
Not at all.
And that was a critical part of the matchup. But for what you see from the Jags and what you've seen from them the past couple of weeks, now getting ready to host the Chargers, a team who they went to LA and beat down very, very
Yeah, that was
soundly.
back in week 3. I think, you know, it'll be a different game.
Right. So in terms of where the Jags are right now, what did you kind of make of the way that Trevor Lawrence played?
Um, I thought Lawrence was solid. I didn't think he was special in this game. I thought that in the second half, the Titans made an adjustment. They played far more man coverage. In the second half, they played more 5-man D-line fronts. They generated far more pressure on Lawrence. and they did it out of those 5-man D-line fronts with some pressure schemes as well, and they struggled in the second half. They were only 1 for 6 on third down in the second half, and Lawrence uh, was 1 for 4 versus man coverage after going 4 for 4 in the first half. So, I think that, they pose some problems. The Chargers play more man coverage than people might think. So again, every game is different. I don't think you can extrapolate just from this game and say, hey, that's what's going to happen this week against the Chargers. But I don't think this was Lawrence's best game. Look, they only scored one offensive touchdown. It was a beautifully designed play on a concept that I've seen from them throughout this season. So it was really, really well designed, and Kirk ran a great route on his crosser to beat McCrary, and it ended up being pitch and catch. But they had no commitment to the run game whatsoever, which kind of surprised me.
The way that I'm glad you mentioned Kirk, because obviously he was very active in this game and he was very productive. He's been that for them all season long. The way that they use Kirk, though, Greg, in that offense seems like it's been such an asset for Trevor Lawrence this year.
Yeah, and in this game, he made 3 big plays versus man coverage throughout the game. The 25-yard TD where he beat McCreary, 16 yards on 3rd and 7, he beat Avery, and 33 yards versus Hooker. So he made 3 big plays in this game versus man coverage. And Kirk's a good player. And he ended the season, if I'm not mistaken, as having the most targets from the slot and the most receptions from the slot, but he can also line up outside. I mean, that touchdown in the second quarter, the 25-yarder, he was actually an outside receiver. He had a reduced split, meaning he was closer to the formation, but he was technically an outside receiver.
So now, with this Chargers game, you mentioned that this game will obviously be different. These are 2 different teams than they were in Week 3. What I saw today from some people at Chargers practice is that Rashawn Slater is practicing for the
Yeah.
first time since Week 3. We have no idea his availability at this point, but given how big a struggle pass protection has been for LA this year, that has to be a good sign, at least, that he's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd love him to play again. Sometimes window opens. Like I saw for the Bills, Micah Hyde and Jamison Crowder, their window open, but McDermott said they're not playing this week. So, I don't know. The Chargers have not said anything one way or the other about Slater, other than the fact that the window has opened. So I don't know. But, they have Justin Herbert. I watched a lot of Justin Herbert today. It was one of my little pet projects today to kind of go through the season and watch some Justin Herbert, and he's really a good player. And they do, it's funny. They seem to be an easy target. Joe Lombardi, their offensive coordinator, seems to be an easy target for a lot of people who seem to rip him for the fact that because Herbert is big and strong and can throw it down the field, that they don't seem to do that more.
Mm-hmm.
But they do it more than people think. And I never understand why completions, which they get a lot of completions. Herbert gets a lot of completions. Herbert, in an odd way, can be kind of robotic and mechanical, but in a good way. He gets the ball out and he completes passes. And I remember when I did the book years ago with Ron Jaworski, and I did all the interviews and speaking to offensive coaches. And one of the first things I kept hearing from offensive coaches, Buck, was the number one thing you want in the passing game is completions.
Yeah.
And, Justin Herbert gets a lot of completions. They might be 8 yards, but you know what? They're completions.
Right.
And they keep you on schedule and they help you move the chains. And they do some really good things with their route concepts versus both man and zone coverage. When you watch, one thing I get a chance to do a little bit more of now when you get to the playoffs is watch one team over the course of a longer period of time. It's not where it's during a normal week where I have so many games to get through.
Sure.
So when you watch 100 plays in a row of an offense, you really get a feel for their concepts. And I actually think the Chargers have some really good pass game concepts.
But I mean, to say, that they've become an easy target as far as that particular criticism, that they don't push the ball down the field enough, Greg. I don't understand why that is of so much. I mean, obviously I understand why that's important to do from time to time, but like to get the quarterback operating in a mechanically comfortable fashion would seem to be the objective for these guys more often than not. Like that just rings counterintuitive to me.
As I get an opportunity to talk to coaches. And there are coaches who call me and ask me my opinion. So I'm very grateful for that obviously I've engendered enough respect based on what I've done over a long period of time. and maybe people, because we're so used to seeing Patrick Mahomes do what he does. We're so used to seeing, a Josh Allen make some of these, incredible plays. We're used to seeing these outside of system plays that more quarterbacks than ever can do. Okay, because you're getting really good athletes playing the position and they can do more of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's a negative. But sometimes I feel people lose sight of the fact of how the position is taught. It's not taught to, hey, let's just go out and run around today and let's try to make a cool play. Every quarterback is taught a system. Every quarterback is taught reading progressions. Every quarterback is taught those reading progressions versus specific coverages. That's how the position is taught. And there's nothing wrong. It's not a negative to execute that at a high level. There's nothing wrong with saying, by the way, that Brock Purdy is in a great system that really defines, reads, and throws for him and allows him to, or helps him operate at a high level of efficiency. That's not a knock on Brock Purdy, and people, I think, start to take, when you make a comment like that, they start to view that as a negative on the quarterback. And it's not. That's what coaches should be doing, and that's what you want coaches to do, so the quarterback can feel comfortable operating at a high level of efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, it's the negative connotation that people assign to game manager, right? When in reality,
Correct.
the quarterback is supposed to manage the game. Like
Well,
that's
that's what a quarterback is supposed to do. And same thing with the connotation, the negative one that comes with system quarterback. But every quarterback is a system quarterback because that's how the position is taught.
yeah. So let's talk about the system that the quarterback is currently assisting Brock Purdy and helping him to operate well and play to his skill sets at this point with Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers. They've been really rolling since
Yep.
they've had to make the quarterback change out of necessity. They're healthy, which is not something that a lot of teams can say at this time of year. And they'll have Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks, one of three divisional games that we will see an extra version of in the playoffs this week. Greg, I'm really looking forward to this one, not just because Geno's been such a shooting star all year long, but because these teams always play really fun, really exciting matchup driven games.
And I think there's a couple of elements to this. We've talked about the 49er offense and Purdy's playing at a really high level. And, I think that they're a team offensively. Now that Debo's back, they've got really three players, arguably four, that can line up you can account Juszczyk. He's five, really, because they play out of 21 personnel, meaning two backs, as much or more than any team in the league. They really have five eligibles who can line up anywhere in the formation, okay? That makes it hard defensively and easier for the quarterback, relatively speaking, because one of the things you're trying to do with a quarterback is give him as much information as possible, but before the ball is snapped. Because if he feels really comfortable before the ball is snapped, based on how the defense has to react to formations and the location of receivers, then before he even drops back, he feels like, okay, I know what I'm looking at. I know what my route concept and combinations are, and now I know where to go with the football. Now, you always have to confirm and validate that, but if you feel real comfortable before the snap, you can operate better. It's when you're dropping back and you're trying to figure it out because you only have anywhere from 1.5 to 3 seconds to really figure that out, then that's not a lot of time. But I think one area of this game that is going to be really interesting is third down. The money down or the disaster down, depending on which side of the ball you're on. Geno Smith is the most sacked quarterback in the NFL on third down. And there's many reasons for that. Obviously, there's never one reason for anything, as much as people like to make it one reason. And we know what the 49ers pass rush is. And we know that the 49ers move people around. We know that Fred Warner can be part of their pass rush. They can line up with 5-man fronts. They can make it difficult for your pass protection. And the reality is the rookie left tackle, Charles Cross, has not played well over the last month or 6 weeks. He's had a really hard time in one-on-one pass protection. The Niners will know that from tape study. So to me, third down on that side of the ball is one area to really focus on.
The Geno experience this year, Greg, and I'm glad that you brought up I did not know that about him being the most sacked quarterback on third downs this year. Just generally though, what have you made of the work that he's been able to do this year within that system?
Really, really good. And I think they've done a great job with him. I think with quarterbacks, and all quarterbacks are different. Someone like Joe Burrow, for instance, is obviously just a terrific processor, or as the phrase I like to use is elimination and isolation. It's probably just innate in his DNA. He just sees things at the speed with which you're required and demanded to see things. He knows where to go with the football. He just has that in his DNA. Someone like Geno is not quite like that. It's probably one reason why it's his ninth year, and this is his first full year as a starter since early in his career. So you have to help him. And again, that there's nothing wrong with saying that. People might think, "Oh, you're ripping Geno." No, they're helping him become a really nice player, and that's what coaches should do. So they've done a really good job with him. Play action boot has been a major part of what they do. They've really defined a lot of the reads and throws for him, so when he drops back, he can get rid of the ball. Now, when it's third and long, at times you can't do that. The defense has the tactical advantage. And that's where Geno, at times, and again, it's not just his fault. I want to make that clear, but at times he can get stuck in the pocket because it's not quite as easy on third and long, let's say. And that's one of the reasons, one, not the only, why he's the most sacked quarterback on third down.
He's going to be in line for an interesting market whenever
Yeah.
their
And he
season
makes, I
comes
mean, he
around.
threw a touchdown this week, and he's made a ton of these great throws this year. I don't know if you saw it, the touchdown he hit to Lockett. Did you see that throw?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable throw. I mean, a great throw.
But I feel like I've looked up every couple of weeks and he's had 2 or 3 of them in a
Yeah.
game like that,
Oh,
Greg.
yeah. Well, he's always been able to throw it. That was never an issue coming out of West Virginia. Back 9 years ago when he came out, or 10 years ago, the whole air raid concept was viewed as a negative for a quarterback. Now, because so many college teams run elements of the air raid, and quarterbacks are look, that's what Patrick Mahomes ran in college. So now we've kind of accepted, or league people and coaches have accepted that, hey, that's what these guys play in. Don't hold it against them. Incorporate some of that into what we do in the NFL so they're comfortable. Whereas 10 years ago, it was seen as, oh, he runs an air raid offense. We don't do that in the NFL, so he's really not going to be any good. So things have changed.
Fortunately, and
Yeah.
I think to the benefit of certainly the players and
Well,
for the aesthetics.
the
It's
bottom line is when you draft a quarterback, you know, at some point, yes, you do have to teach him many things, no question. The NFL is different than college, contrary to what people might think that Georgia could win in the NFL, contrary to that pointless point of view. But at the end of the day, you still want to try to give your quarterback some things early in his career that he's comfortable with. And if he's comfortable running certain schemes from college, such as an air raid or such as a spread, whatever it may be, that can't be 100% of your offense in the NFL, but you certainly want to give him things that he's comfortable with.
just trying to get them a foundation as you build them up
Exactly.
through the
Exactly.
course of your system. Sticking in the NFC, Greg, and we'll wrap up with this one. Cowboys and Bucks is also a rematch, but this one
Yeah.
from week 1.
Long time ago.
An eternity ago at this point. I was shocked. My jaw dropped when I looked at the score of the Cowboys Washington game
Yeah.
and saw that they had lost by 20. I haven't had the opportunity. I saw the highlights, but Greg,
Well,
what
they
kind
were
of
lowlights as far as the Cowboys were concerned.
well, I think that's the only way that you could put it.
Yeah. It was a really poor game for Dak Prescott. It was just, you'd like to think it was just one of those games, but Prescott, he really did not play well in this game. He had limited condensed vision, and when you're not seeing things clearly, what happens is you start to play fast because you don't have time. So when you drop back, and for whatever reason, only Dak could tell you, but for whatever reason you're not seeing it, you start to move, you start to play fast. He did that. He did not play with any sense of timing and anticipation. He moved his head. When you see a quarterback dropping back, Buck, and this is something for fans to notice, if you see a quarterback dropping back and his head is moving from side to side, that means he's not seeing anything.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't be moving your head from side to side. Mike Martz talks about this all the time. One of the things he looks at when he evaluates quarterbacks is that if he sees too much head movement, that's a real negative for him, because then the quarterback's not seeing anything. And then you start to be frenetic in your movement. So he was just not sharp mentally in this game, and that therefore that made him play fast physically.
So with this game, the Buccaneers have plenty of their own issues. They're an under 500 team that's going to host a playoff
I
game.
know that's pretty amazing, isn't it? They're under 500. Who would
Well,
have thought that?
it's certainly not Tom
Yeah,
Brady.
yeah.
But nonetheless, Tom Brady's back in the tournament, and everybody else is just going to have to eat it until then. The Bucks, though, it seems like they had found something, and obviously Mike Evans was ruled out in this game relatively quickly,
He'll be playing this week though.
dealing with an illness. So that is the hope, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
What about, has anything changed with the Bucks offense, or is it still the protection issues that are at the root of all their problems?
Well, 2 weeks ago when they played to win against Carolina, they had both tackles playing. I don't know what you've heard. It's my understanding that we could well see Ryan Jensen this week. I don't know if that's a definite, but I think they're trending in that direction.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of optimism about that.
Yes. So if that's the case, because what happened 2 weeks ago against Carolina is Brady, for really the first time that I can remember, maybe it goes back to very early in the season, Brady had time in the pocket, and you could tell that he was comfortable waiting and making late in the down throws, which used to be something he did at a really high level in New England. And this year, he was never even getting to late in the down because the pressure was there, and he was not going to get hit, and he was not going to get sacked. So he would just get rid of the ball.
Yeah.
That was a game 2 weeks ago where he actually made some late in the down throws, and you could see his comfort level just increase in the pocket. So it's really a function of protection. They're not that complicated as far as their route concepts. They rely on Brady to make throws to really good receivers. And if he has time, that can happen.
Yeah.
And the Cowboys have a significant question at the left corner position. Diggs normally plays right corner. There have been a few receivers he's traveled with this year, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, but for the most part, he plays right corner, and they have really a big question mark at left corner right now.
Well, you can get further breakdowns on these games and all the other got to make sure I say super wild card weekend games
That's
coming
correct.
up on the NFL Matchup Show, Saturday morning showings, ESPN Plus on demand. Set your DVRs just in case to make sure you're getting the best X's and O breakdown that you can find on television ahead of the games. Greg, always a pleasure. Enjoy it this weekend, and I'm looking for. I'm not gonna lie, I'm looking forward to watching football on the couch this weekend.
Yeah, I think I might watch a few of the games myself. Why not?
There might be some decent ones worth our time, I think.
Let's hope there's no 65-7 scores.
You know what? I appreciated it though. I went to bed at a reasonable time. It was swell.
I don't know why I stayed up. I don't know why. I mean, I didn't quite make it till the bitter end, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, plenty of Georgia plays. We're going to be talking about come draft time.
Maybe as Sting once said, I'm the king of pain. Who knows?
Well, until then, Greg, we'll talk next week. Appreciate the time, buddy.
All right.